Good evening. I'd like to start by saying thank you to the congregation here for hosting this meeting. This is always a good meeting. We always have a blast coming out here, hanging out with a bunch of kids. So thank you for putting it on. We know it's a lot of work to put a meeting on. So thank you once again. Also thank you to whoever was responsible for scheduling the young speakers. I appreciate you putting me on the first night because you get to go, you get it out of the way, and the rest of the meeting is so much more fun. So the question that we have under consideration for the next few minutes is, as Caleb mentioned, is if God is real, then why do bad things happen? This topic is a very, very deep topic, much deeper than 15 minutes can do justice to it. But we'll go about it in two sections. The first half of the study is going to be geared towards giving a biblical answer to the overall question of why bad things happen. And then the second half of the study is going to be geared towards facing the challenge of accepting bad things when they happen. So as we get into it, I'd first like to rephrase the question a little bit. The question originally is, if God is real, then why do bad things happen? I'd like to change it to, since God is real, why do bad things happen? The reason for that is twofold. Because usually when somebody comes up to you and says, if God is real, why do bad things happen? You have been in a discussion with them and you've made your point about why God is real. And then they go back to this kind of emotional argument to undermine what you have already established. So it's to try to kind of dodge their emotional argument. But second of all, if God is not real, then I have no answer for why bad things happen. If God is not real, not only do I not have an answer for why bad things happen, I can absolutely not give you any direction for how to get through bad trials when they do happen and in your life. So getting into this question of, since God is real, why do bad things happen? We need to back up all the way to Genesis chapter 1. When the world was first created, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Now at the end of chapter 1 of Genesis, it's God finishes creating on the 6th day. And he looks out at all that he has created and he says it was good. When God first made the world was good. The world was perfect, the world was pure, there was no sin in the world, nothing had corrupted the world when God first made it. But then we get down to Genesis chapter 3. And we find out that God had given man a rule. Genesis 3 verse 11, we find out that the rule that God had given man was to not eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But man had free will, and man decided to go against the will of God. Genesis 3 and 6, first Eve decided to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Then Adam decided to eat of it, following Eve's lead. And in Genesis 3, verse 16, we are introduced to the first consequences, the first suffering that was going to be introduced to the world. Genesis 3:16, we find out that because they sinned, women's pain in childbearing was going to be greatly increased. I don't know what it was going to be like before this happened. I don't even know what it's like now that after it happened. But anyways, the case is, pain was going to be greatly increased. Second of all, men would now have to sweat, toil, and labor to get fruit from the ground. So that they could eat, they would now have to work for it. And third, all men would now have to experience physical death. Before this, nobody had to die. Imagine that, a world where nobody had to die. You don't have to lose anybody. You don't have to face the trial of losing somebody that you love so much and going through life without them. Nobody had to die. But in Genesis 3, verse 22, men would now have to experience physical death because they did not follow God's will. So this kind of answers, in a basic way, why bad things happen. Bad things happen because sin came into the world. With sin came consequences, and consequences, there was suffering. Along those same lines, more verses to back up this statement that suffering and bad things came into the world because of sin. James chapter 4, verse 1, where it says, "Where do wars and fights come from among you? Do they not come from your desires for pleasure that war in your members?" So the writer here says, where do wars and fights come from? Where do these things come from that cause so much pain, so much suffering for so many different people, so much death, where do they come from? Do they not come from you? Do they not come from your desires for pleasure? That is the root of where these things come from. They come from man who has evil desires at times that lead to sin. Also, James 3 verse 16, further establishing the point, for where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there. So that's the base answer for our study, the first half of our study. Why do bad things happen in this world? Bad things happen in this world because sin came into the world. As soon as sin came into the world, that was not the world that God created. It was not the perfect, pure world, the perfect, pure place that God had in mind. And suffering now came into the world. But when you get into this study, you get into this question, that really only touches the surface of what somebody has in mind when they ask this question. Because in the world, bad things sometimes happen to good people. And that's more what people have in mind when they come to you and they ask you this question. You can rationalize in your mind, okay, bad things happen because of sin. So based on that, if somebody is a bad person, if somebody is a sinner, then okay, I get it. They deserve bad things happen, that they have consequences to them. But how do you answer it? Why does something bad happen to somebody who is good? And I found a poem that kind of presents a situation that somebody is likely to have in mind when they come to you and ask you why bad things happen. And as a side note, this poem is about a drunk driving accident. So here at a young people's meeting, young people, it can be a temptation, it can be a struggle for us to face our friends, our peers that maybe have influence over us in drinking and the temptation of drinking alcohol. So if drinking and alcohol is a temptation to you, then consider what it can do to your life. Not just drinking, much less drinking and driving, but consider what it can really do to your life before you begin to fall to that temptation. The poem goes like this. It's called The Death of an Innocent. And it goes, I went to a party, Mom. I remembered what you said. You told me not to drink, Mom, so I drank soda instead. I really felt proud inside, Mom, the way that you said I would. I didn't drink and drive, Mom, even though the others said I should. I know I did the right thing, Mom. I know you were always right. Now the party is finally ending, Mom, as everyone is driving out of sight. As I got into my car, Mom, I knew I'd get home in one piece. Because of the way you raised me, so responsible and sweet. I started to drive away, Mom, but as I pulled out into the road, the other car didn't see me, Mom, and it hit me like a load. As I lay there on the pavement, Mom, I hear the policeman say, the other guy is drunk, Mom, and now I'm the one who will pay. I'm lying here dying, Mom. I wish you'd get here soon. How could this happen to me, Mom? My life just burst like a balloon. There is blood all around me, Mom, and most of it is mine. I hear the medics say, Mom, I'll die in a short time. I just wanted to tell you, Mom, I promise I didn't drink. It was the others, Mom. The others, they didn't think. He was probably at the same party as I. The only difference is, he drank and I will die. Why do people drink, Mom? It can ruin your whole life. I'm feeling sharp pains now. Pains just like a knife. The guy who hit me is walking, Mom, and I don't think it's fair. I'm lying here dying and all he can do is stare. Tell my brother not to cry, Mom. Tell Daddy to be brave. And when I go to heaven, Mom, put Daddy's girl on my grave. Someone should have told him, Mom, not to drink and drive. If only they had told him, Mom, I would still be alive. My breath is getting shorter, Mom. I'm becoming very scared. Please don't cry for me, Mom. When I needed you, you were always there. I have one last question, Mom, before I say goodbye. I didn't drink and drive, so why am I the one to die? This brings up more of a situation that people have in their mind when they ask you, why does something bad happen? Because it's much more of a struggle to figure out why somebody would have to pay for the consequences of somebody else. And writers of poems are not the only ones who realize that this happens in life. The writer of Ecclesiastes brings to mind the same struggle. Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verse 14, he says, "There is a vanity which occurs on earth, that there are just men to whom it happens according to the work of the wicked. Again, there are wicked men to whom it happens according to the work of the righteous. I said that this also is vanity." So how do we answer this question? How do we begin to study and see what guidance there is in figuring out why bad things happen to good people that seemingly is not fair? Well, we have a prime example, luckily, in the Bible, a perfect situation to help us address this issue. And that situation, that example, is in the book of Job. Job, we know from the first chapter of the book of Job, was a good man. He was a God-fearing man. And because of that, Satan had been walking about the earth, it says, and he came to God, and God asked Satan, he says, "Have you seen my servant Job? Because he is a good man, upright, in all that he does." And Satan basically says, "Well, of course he's a good man, God. You give everything to Job. He's been blessed so abundantly. He has no reason to turn his back on you." So God says, "Okay, Job, you can go, Satan, you can go out, do to Job what you want, only do not affect his person. Do not affect him as himself." So Satan, with this permission, things begin to happen to Job. Job gets a messenger. The first messenger comes to him in Job chapter 1, verse 15, with the message that the Sabeans had killed his servants. And as the first messenger is just starting to leave, just finishing delivering his message, a second messenger comes up and he says, "Job, your servants, more of your servants have been killed, and more of your possessions have been destroyed, this time by fire from heaven." As the second messenger is just finishing his message, a third messenger comes on the heels of the second and says, "Job, more of your servants have been killed, more of your possessions have been taken, this time by the Chaldeans." So 3 horrible messages right in a row. You've basically just lost everything, Job. But wait, that's not it. A fourth messenger comes to Job, right on the heels of the third, with undoubtedly the worst message of all that a father could ever have delivered to him. And that is the message that all 10 of his children have been killed. 7 sons and 3 daughters have died in their eldest son's house when a great wind came and knocked over the house on all of them. So Job, all of this has just happened to him. All of this horrible tragedies have just happened to Job. What is his response? The first lesson we can learn from Job, Job chapter 1, verse 22, it says, "In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong." So no matter what we go through, no matter what we face, do not sin against God, do not charge God with wrong. So okay, Job did not sin against God or charge God with wrong when things happen to his possessions and his children. Satan goes back to God and says, "Well, of course, you haven't let me do anything to him personally." So God says, "Okay, you can do what you want to Job, but do not kill him." So Job is now smitten with boils from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. And what does he do now? His wife comes to him and she says, "Job, will you hold fast to your integrity? Just curse God and die. Why will you continue to stick with God after all this is happening to you?" And Job answers his wife, teaching us a second lesson in Job chapter 2, verse 10. He says, "Shall we accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips." So even after all this happens to Job, he doesn't even sin against God with his lips, teaching us the second lesson. Don't even sin against God with your lips. Shall we accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? And then much of the book of Job is devoted to his discussion with his friends about what has happened to him. And if there's anything to learn from all of that discussion, it's that sometimes there may be a long time in between when something happens to us and by the time we finally start to figure it out, for us to just rationalize and mentally go through what has happened. And then we get to the end of the book of Job, and God starts to answer Job. Starts to talk to Job about what has happened. And we won't go into too much detail about what God says to Job, But if you go back and you read what God answers Job about why all this has happened, God doesn't really answer why it happened. He only tells Job, he only discusses with Job that I am God, I am great, and you are a man, is basically the gist of what God says to Job. Job never gets his answer from God about why it happened. We know from reading the book of Job that God could have easily explained the whole situation with Satan wanting to tempt Job, but that's not what happened. Job did not get to know why these things happened to him. And the conclusion that Job came to in Job chapter 42, verse 2 and 3, he says, I know that you can do everything, and that no purpose of yours can be withheld from you. You asked, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. So Job was basically left with the conclusion that I don't know why this happened, but I know that God is God. He couldn't explain exactly why this certain situation happened to him. And we may not today be able to explain why this situation happens to this person. We may not have a reason to give them why. But we do know that God is God, and we know that we have a hope. Romans 8:28 says, we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. If you live a faithful life, if you get to the end of your life and you are faithful to God, you have lived a life of service to God, and you make it to heaven, then everything that you had to go through in your life, no matter what the tragedies, no matter what the struggles, there was a happy ending. You made it to heaven, and everything will be all right. So in conclusion, we know that evil came into the world, bad things started to happen in this world because sin entered the world. But when it gets down to why did this certain event happen to this certain person, we may not always be able to give an answer why. At best, we know from Ecclesiastes 9, verse 11, that time and chance happen to all men. But we have a hope. I probably will never forget, I had a teacher in high school that we would talk about religion, found out that he was an ex-Catholic and he didn't really subscribe to it anymore. He became an atheist. And we would discuss all the time about God, why I believed in God, why he didn't. And we finally got down to it, and it was this question. He had a niece or somebody, a young girl that was related to him that passed away from a terminal illness at a young age. And he just said, you know, how can I believe in a God that will let that happen? And you know, we may not be able to tell them why that happened, but the difference between his stance and our stance is that we have a hope. We have a hope in heaven, somewhere that is far better than this anyways, and to them it's just over. Revelations 21 verse 4 describes our hope. It says, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. I pray that we all have that hope today. I pray that we all have the confidence that that's where we're going. If we don't have that confidence, if you've never become a child of God, have you heard the gospel of Christ? Do you believe what you have heard? Do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? Are you willing to repent, change your ways, now follow God, as Jesus says that we must do in Luke chapter 13, verse 3? And are you willing to confess that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God? If you are willing to do that, he is willing to confess you before his Father in heaven. And then will you be baptized for the remission of your sins? If you've done that and you still have doubts, you feel like there's something that needs to be made right, make it right. We don't know always what will happen to us. If you be one of either class, please come while we stand and sing.